obviously very terrible attack by Hamas militants from Gaza into Israel proper. So people only just focus on that, right?
Yes.
Oh my God. And then, of course, so this is terrible. It is barbaric. It is, I mean, it's all of those things. Yes, fine. But it doesn't put that loss of life, of innocent lives that were lost that day and the hostages taken, which, of course, no one would ever, say is not terrible, right? Because any loss of life, and especially civilian life, committed by anyone, this is not acceptable by standards of morality and humanity. So, of course, that was terrible. But when you just stay with that, and then you use that to simply, it's what I would call, without looking at the history of as to why would somebody even do that and commit those kinds of atrocities. Matlab, what is there? And if you are going to say, as their, Minister of Defense said, oh, it's because all of them, Hamas and the people they represent, the Palestinians, they are nothing more than human animals, then what you've done is you are resorting to a Manichaean kind of view of the world and of society and of people that divides people up into us and them, good and evil. And we know that this is incorrect. And what it doesn't do, you see, is to take what you just mentioned, very importantly, is the history behind something like that occurring. And then it allows for the power, in this case, the Israeli state, with all of its military might, to unleash an unprecedented attack of unprecedented proportions.
Exactly.
Which are so disproportionate against, again, an innocent civilian population, because you've already called them human animals, right? So you are not distinguishing between people who are just trying to go about their normal life, which they have not been able to do for decades, ever since the creation of Israel. And Gaza itself has been under siege since the big, a few years into this, our current century. So you are refusing to take that history into account, right? And what you are guilty of then, which unfortunately most of the mainstream media sources, particularly in the US and the UK and other Western presses, they are guilty of what I would call is what we, the word is presentism.
Correct.
That you are looking only at the present.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my God, what happened?
Yeah. This doesn't exist in isolation.
No, nothing exists in isolation.
Yeah.
Things don't just happen, right? Things happen because of, a background, because of, there is always a backstory to everything.
Yeah.
And this was no exception, but we are not being told that backstory. That is the unfortunate thing. Mainstream media and the leaders, the political leaders of the Western world in particular, are refusing to go into the past, and they don't even have to go into the very long ago past. We're talking of past within the living memory of a lot of people, refusing to acknowledge that the history that led to the creation of Israel, and what that has unleashed on the native population of that entire region. What has been going on there? I mean, why would people, knowing that you are taking on an enemy, in this case Israel, right, that has such one of the most superior military armies in the world, and
right,
including a nuclear arsenal.
Exactly.
The only one in the region, right? If you are taking them on with a few rockets and some guns and some knives, you know that, it's like David going against Goliath. What do you expect will happen? So some people, going to that extent and taking such a big step, knowing that they will be crushed. Why would anyone do that? Why did we have suicide bombers? Who wants to take their own lives? These are questions that are worthy of consideration. And if you want to dismiss that by saying, well, people, they are human animals, that's why they do it, that is not an answer. It is not an acceptable answer.
Yeah.
So yes, we have to look at the history always, I tell my students also, if you do not understand the historical and the socio-political, the economic context, right?
Yes.
Of a particular novel that we are reading in class, or a particular film that we are watching, or poems that are written by somebody. If you don't understand the historical, socio-political context within which the writers who created these works operate, then how can you understand it even? How can you make any kind of judgment about what they are saying in these works? Because you see, literature, like any other, art form, it does not happen or occur or gets written or read in a vacuum.
Correct.
There is always a context.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so history, history is important. And that is, for me as an academic who, has taught for a long time and still teaching, when I teach in my classes, whatever the topic or subject matter or area of the world is, because I teach courses in world literature, particularly literature from the global South, which in American classrooms, a lot of, the students who come to me, they don't have a background in that, right? So when I teach them, my whole purpose is that they should learn about the world around them, and they should learn in a way where they can start asking questions. Because if you are not asking questions, then the way that you read or you understand the world is from a very extremely limited and narrow point of view. And then in a way, that is, you are being deprived of a deeper and wider understanding of the world in which you exist. So as an educator, for me, that's my purpose, is, how can I help them? Yes, see all sides to a question. There are, multiple points of view on everything, which is, the beauty of the world. But there are times when you have to ask, when you ask certain questions, you have to also then take a position, a morally proper position.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that I'm trying to highlight here, is that obviously we all condemn the loss of life. It doesn't matter whether it's Israeli innocent people or it's Palestinian people. We strongly condemn loss of life because the color of the blood is the same, like they say. But the problem here is that the way the portrayal of the events, there's no objectivity to it. It's just zoomed in, a very narrow focus, and the rhetoric that is being generated is extremely inflammatory, and it's not directed towards resolving the situation. It's actually directed towards escalating the situation, and that's where it becomes horrible, and that's where it seems like that there's going to be no end to this loss.
The Palestinians in Gaza, are not able to defend themselves against the onslaught and bombardment, and they are being deprived because Israel rules that land. Israel is the occupying force there. I mean, the Gazans have been living in the world's largest open-air prison for decades at this point. So their water supply, their fuel, their any kind of aid, medicines, jobs, everything is dependent on Israel because Israel is the ruler.
The most densely populated region in the world. There is absolutely no room for them to go anywhere.
They cannot go anywhere. So they will just be, and what I want to ask is, this is what really hurts and is so confusing and so upsetting, is that here we have a people representing a state, which is a state for Jews in the Middle East, right? It's a Jewish state. It's a democracy, yes, but for Jews only. Arabs are second-class citizens. So when Israel claims to be the only democracy in the Middle East, that also is a falsification. It is not a democracy for all of its citizens, including the Arab citizens of Israel, right? So yes, it's a Jewish state. And so the members of this state, right, they have that historical memory, and many of them are themselves descendants of people who were wiped out in the Holocaust in Europe. So what a terrible thing, that tragedy and that they have had to suffer. How can a people with that history of their own condone a government that acts in their names and is hell-bent on wiping out in a genocidal way another people? It doesn't, it's a very difficult thing to grasp.
Agreed. People
and I mean, there is, and you were asking for a history, right? So I mean, we know, for example, in the war in 1960s, first of all, it was 1948, in one of the novels that I'm teaching in one of my courses, Men in the Sun, by Ghassan Kanafani, who himself a Palestinian, a Marxist Palestinian. He was a freedom fighter, but also a writer and a playwright. I mean, he and his 11-year-old niece, he was only 36, he was killed in Beirut by the Mossad, just for his activities of wanting to stand up for the liberation, speak on behalf of his people, and for writing. And so I teach his novel, Men in the Sun. And, over there, we see that in 1948, after the creation of Israel, the army is moving in and taking over the Arab villages where Arab populations were living, right?
Yeah.
And they are completely dispossessed. Their olive trees are being mowed down. So there is a farmer with whom we start the novel who is saying, oh my God, he is dispossessed of his small orchard of 10 olive trees. And he has to go as a refugee, try to be smuggled, poor old man, to make money because he knows no other way of living, and he thinks he can maybe go to Kuwait and maybe start life over there and send money back. Of course, he and the other men in this novel who try to make that journey, because they have to be smuggled out. I ask my students, why do they have to be smuggled out? Because they are stateless. Israel is not giving them any passports. The borders of these other countries are closed, which are themselves European creations, right? All of these states, Iraq and Kuwait and so on, they are a result of an even more older history from World War I, right? When these states were carved up, which divided and pitted one Arab against another, Arabs against Arabs, tribes against tribes. So they can't, rely on any of them. They just have to, try to hope that they can get smuggled out. And in the end, the men in this novel, they don't make it. But the question is that, like the farmer Abu Qais, he keeps on dreaming of his orchard of 10 olive trees, which were mowed down by the Israeli army. That practice is continuing today, to this day, in the occupied lands, on which Palestinians are being, quote, allowed to live on the West Bank or Gaza. How are these people supposed to make their lives, and make their livelihoods? And, at that time, so that was 48, say, that has been continuing. And then in 67, there was a second war, right? Which again, Israel won. But in that process, it annexed lands that did not belong to it in its push to, for Eretz Israel or Greater Israel, right?
Yeah.
After that war, when they won and they started annexing land, the United Nations, the Security Council, this was, I believe, November 1967, the members of the Security Council unanimously voted for, they passed Resolution 242, which called on Israel to withdraw from the annexed territories that it had seized in that 6-day war. But now you look, this is what, 50, 60 years later, Israel not only continues to violate that resolution, it has continued to expand settlements.